I should have seen it coming. With my parents, nothing was ever given freely. Love, praise, even the smallest acts of kindness came with strings attached. So when my mother casually mentioned that my kids' Christmas gifts would depend on how much I helped them this year, I knew exactly what she meant. If you support us more, the kids will have a nice Christmas, she had said, as if she were doing me a favor. I almost laughed at how predictable it was. This wasn't new. Last year, I sent them $2,000 a month for 6 months, not because they were struggling. Their house was paid off, my dad still had a part-time job, and they had no debts. But they had a way of making me feel like I owed them, like financially supporting them was just another responsibility that came with being their son. I never questioned it until this year. Money was tighter for my own family, unexpected bills, school expenses, a car repair. I could only afford to send them $1,000 a month. I thought they'd understand. They didn't. A week after I cut back, my mother called. "What about the Christmas presents?" she asked casually, like it was just a normal conversation. But I knew better. "You're not buying them presents?" I asked, already bracing myself. "Well, we have to be fair," she said in that condescending tone she used when pretending to be reasonable. "Last year, you gave more, so we could do more. This year, things are different." By fair, she meant punishing my kids because I sent her less money. The worst part? My sister, Ava, had never sent them a dime. And yet, her 3 kids always got spoiled expensive gifts, trips, the works. Meanwhile, my 2 kids, Jake and Emma, were being used as leverage. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "are you seriously telling me that you're buying presents for Ava's kids, but not mine because I sent you less money?" She sighed dramatically. "It's not personal, honey. It's just the way things worked out. Maybe next year, if you can be more generous." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. When I told my wife, Emily, she was stunned. "They wouldn't really do that to the kids," she said, shaking her head. "They'll come around. It's Christmas." I wanted to believe her, I really did, but I knew my parents better than that. And I was right. When we arrived at my parents' house, everything looked perfect. The tree was glowing, the fireplace crackled, and the whole place smelled like cinnamon and pine. My parents greeted us with big smiles, like nothing had happened. Ava was already there, sipping cocoa while her kids tore into beautifully wrapped gifts. The floor was covered in torn paper and expensive toys. My parents stood nearby, watching proudly. Jake and Emma ran to the tree, eyes shining with excitement, until they realized something was missing. There were no presents for them. A knot tightened in my chest. Emily squeezed my hand. I could feel the tension in her grip, but her expression remained unreadable. My mother, suddenly avoiding my gaze, leaned in and whispered, "We weren't going to say anything in front of the kids, but you understand, right? Things are just different this year." I stared at her, barely able to process the words. "Are you serious?" I kept my voice low, but my fists clenched at my sides. "You really didn't get them anything?" My dad shrugged and turned back to his coffee. "Let's not make a scene, son. It's Christmas." I looked at my kids. Jake's lower lip trembled. Emma's small hands clutched the hem of my jacket. I swallowed the anger burning inside me. I refused to let my children feel this. I forced a smile and knelt beside them. "They left them at home, sweetheart. It's okay. We'll have presents later." Emily bent down, whispering something soft and reassuring to them, but I had already made up my mind. "We're leaving," my mother gasped. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous." But I was done. We gathered our coats, ignoring their protests, and walked out into the cold. As I strapped the kids into the car, my mother's voice called after me, but I wasn't listening. Emily reached over, placing a hand over my clenched fist on the steering wheel. "Let's go," she whispered. The kids were silent in the back seat. That hurt the most. Halfway down the road, my phone started ringing. My mother, then Ava, then my dad. I ignored them all. Instead, I pulled into an old diner from my childhood, a place with red booths and a tiny Christmas tree in the corner. As soon as we sat down, Emily turned to the kids with a bright smile. "How about Christmas pancakes? Extra whipped cream?" Jake nodded. Emma just stirred her hot chocolate. I was about to say something to lift their spirits when my phone rang again. This time, I picked up. "What?" "You embarrassed your mother," my dad said, his voice laced with irritation. Walking out like that was cruel. I let out a bitter laugh. Cruel? You let my kids sit there, watching their cousins open gifts, knowing they had nothing. And I'm the bad guy? My dad sighed. It wasn't about the money. Then what was it about? I cut him off, because it sure as hell wasn't about love. Silence. Then, finally, he muttered, "We didn't think they'd notice." I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. Emily must have noticed because she reached over and squeezed my hand. I took a deep breath, steadied my voice. "We're done, Dad. Don't call me again." And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. Jake and Emma didn't say much, and I could see Emily stealing glances at me every few minutes. She knew I was furious, but there was nothing else to say. The damage was done. By the time we got home, the kids were exhausted. Emily tucked them into bed while I sat on the couch staring at my phone. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. My mother had sent a dozen messages ranging from fake concern to outright guilt-tripping. "Mom, Ethan, we didn't mean for things to go this way. You overreacted. Let's talk." "Dad, this isn't how family treats each other. You should apologize to your mother." And my personal favorite from Ava, wow. "You ruined Christmas for everyone. I hope you're happy." I shut my phone off and tossed it onto the coffee table. Emily came in and sat next to me, curling her legs underneath her. "They're asleep," she said softly. I nodded, rubbing my temples. "I don't even know why I'm surprised." She hesitated, then took my hand. "I know this isn't easy, but maybe it's for the best." I scoffed. "How? How is any of this for the best?" She gave me a small smile. "Because now you know. There's no more pretending, no more hoping they'll change. They've shown you exactly who they are," I sighed, leaning back against the couch. She was right. As much as it hurt, at least now I had clarity. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. The next morning, I woke up to even more messages. My dad had only sent one, "Dad, let's not make any rash decisions." Rash decisions. That was funny. I'd been bending over backward for them for years, sending thousands of dollars while they acted like I owed them my entire paycheck. But now that I was setting boundaries, suddenly, I was the problem? I dialed my mom's number. She picked up immediately. "Ethan, I knew you'd come to your senses," she said, her voice way too cheerful, like we hadn't just had a massive fight. "Now, let's talk about this little misunderstanding." "There's nothing to talk about." I cut her off. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm done. I won't be sending you another cent." Silence. Then laughter. She actually laughed. "Oh, Ethan, don't be ridiculous," she said. "Of course, you'll help us. That's what family does." I clenched my jaw. Funny. I thought family was about love and support, not punishing grandkids for money. Her tone changed in an instant. "You're still upset about that? You're overreacting." "No," I said calmly. "I've been underreacting for years." Another pause. Then my dad got on the line, his voice smooth and practiced. "Ethan, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're family. You wouldn't do this to your own parents. I didn't even hesitate. I would. And I just did." There was a long stretch of silence before my mom finally snapped. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I actually laughed. "Oh, that's rich. All you've done for me? You mean guilt-tripping me into giving you thousands of dollars while Ava does nothing and still gets treated like royalty?" "That's different," my mom snapped. "Yeah," I said. "It really is." And then I hung up. At first, they thought I was bluffing. A week passed. Then two. No calls, no texts. They probably assumed I'd come crawling back, apologizing, offering money just to make things right. But I didn't. That's when the real guilt trip started. "Mom, we just never thought our own son would let us down like this. Dad, I guess we'll have to start selling things to make ends meet." Which was a lie. They had plenty of savings. My dad was still working part-time. They had no mortgage, but they hated losing control. When they realized I wasn't backing down, things got uglier. One morning, I woke up to nearly 20 missed calls from Ava. Before I could even think about calling her back, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find her standing on my porch, arms crossed. "You need to fix this," she said, pushing past me into the house. Emily, sitting on the couch with the kids, barely glanced up. She already knew where this was going. I folded my arms. Fix what exactly? Ava rolled her eyes. Mom's a mess. Dad's pissed. They keep saying you abandoned them, and honestly, it's kind of messed up. They're old, Ethan. They need you. I scoffed. Mom is 56, not 86. She has more energy than I do. She waved a hand dismissively. Doesn't matter. She's been sick. Stress, blood pressure, all of it. And now, with you cutting them off, it's making things worse. She's barely sleeping. She's been crying. I narrowed my eyes. You're lying. Ava's mouth opened, then closed. She tried to recover, lowering her voice to something more sympathetic. Ethan, do you really want to be the reason something happens to her? For a second, I almost felt guilty. But then I saw it. That little smirk she was trying to hide. I exhaled sharply. Wow, you almost had me. She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've seen this play before. Mom's not getting her way, so now she's conveniently sick, and the only cure is my money. Ava crossed her arms. You really don't care if something happens to her? I clenched my jaw. No, Ava. I do care, but what I don't care about is being manipulated. If Mom is really sick, she can go see a doctor. Guess what? She has insurance, because I helped pay for it. Ava's face twisted with frustration. You're being impossible. No, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. I'm just done playing this game. She stared at me, like she couldn't believe I was serious. Then she scoffed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out. I shut the door, locked it, and turned to Emily. She was watching me with an approving look. That felt good, I admitted. She smiled. It looked good, too. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. If my parents were desperate enough to fake an illness, they'd try something even worse next. And I wasn't wrong. I should have known they wouldn't stop. People like my parents don't just give up when they lose control. They regroup. They find new ways to manipulate. And right on cue, my mom called a few days later. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the best of me. She didn't even say hello. Ethan, your father fell down the stairs. I blinked. What? He was going to get the mail and he lost his balance. She sniffled. It was awful. He's in so much pain and I don't know how we're going to manage if this keeps happening. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Is he in the hospital? A pause. No, he didn't need to go. He's just resting. But Ethan, this is exactly what I was talking about. We're getting older. We need support. We need you. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Mom, Dad is 60. He plays golf every weekend. He's fine. Her voice wavered. You don't believe me? I believe he might have tripped, I said. I don't believe that. Suddenly, the moment I stopped sending money, he's too frail to function. She let out a shaky breath. I didn't want to say this, but I don't think we can keep the house. I almost laughed. You own it outright. The bills, Ethan, she whined. The maintenance, the repairs, the taxes, then sell it, I said flatly. Silence. Finally, she whispered, I can't believe you just said that. You mean you can't believe you didn't get what you wanted? I corrected. Her voice hardened. Fine, be cruel, be heartless, but don't expect us to be there when you need family. I smirked. Like how you were there for my kids on Christmas? Click. For a while it was peaceful. No calls, no texts. I actually started to feel free. Then one night, Emily nudged me while scrolling through Facebook. You might want to see this. My mom had made a public post. It's devastating when your own child turns on you. After everything we've sacrificed, all the love we've given, we're left abandoned. Growing old is terrifying when the people you raised decide you're no longer worth their time. I never thought I'd know this kind of heartbreak. The comments were exactly what I expected. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Some kids are just ungrateful. You deserve better, honey. Stay strong. And then, right at the bottom, Ava chiming in, I tried talking to him, Mom. He just doesn't care anymore. I don't even recognize him. I let out a short, bitter laugh. They're really doing this. Emily rolled her eyes. Oh, they love playing the victims now that you won't play their game. I cracked my knuckles. All right, let's have some fun. I typed out a comment and hit send. Interesting. Didn't see this energy when you ignored your grandkids on Christmas because I didn't send enough money. But sure, play the victim. Hope it gets you the sympathy cash you're actually looking for. It took less than 10 minutes for my mom to delete the post. For the first time in years, I felt free. No guilt, no obligation, no checking my phone every 5 minutes, dreading another manipulative message. They had gone silent. At first, I thought they had finally given up, that maybe, just maybe, they'd realized I wasn't coming back. But then, 3 days later, my phone rang. Ava. I debated ignoring it, but I was too curious. I picked up. "Just thought you should know," she said, her voice dripping with passive aggression. "Mom and Dad updated their will." I frowned. "Okay?" She let out a dramatic sigh. "They removed you, Ethan. You and your kids. Everything is going to me now." I had to stifle a laugh. "Ava, I don't want anything from them." Silence. I could practically hear the confusion in her breathing. "You? What?" I chuckled. "You think I care about their money? Keep it. Enjoy it. Have fun dealing with them when they actually do get old and start demanding your help." She was quiet for a moment, then snapped, "You're going to regret this. Pretty sure I won't." I hung up. That was the last time I heard from any of them. No calls. No texts. No sudden emergencies or guilt trips. They thought they were punishing me, that by cutting me off, I'd come crawling back, begging for their approval. But in reality, they gave me exactly what I wanted. After Ava's little announcement, I expected at least one last attempt from my parents to rope me back in. A fake emergency, another guilt trip, maybe even an in-person visit where my mom would clutch her chest and act like I was giving her a heart attack. But instead, nothing. No calls, no texts, no dramatic Facebook posts. It had been almost a month, and the silence was weird. I knew better than to think they had suddenly grown a conscience. People like my parents don't just let go. They need control, and when they lose it, they always find another way to get it back. But for now, the peace was nice. Without them constantly draining my energy and my bank account, I finally felt like I could breathe. I had more time with my family, more money to spend on things that actually mattered. And the best part? I could finally do something for us. Emily and I had been driving the same beat-up SUV for years. Every time we thought about upgrading, something always got in the way: unexpected bills, school expenses, and more often than not, sending money to my parents. But not anymore. So I bought a new car. A fully loaded SUV, top-tier everything. Something safe for the kids, reliable, and, for the first time in a long time, something that actually made me happy. I didn't even think about my parents when I posted the picture online. Just a simple caption, "Merry late Christmas to us. Can't wait for new adventures." I didn't expect a reaction. But less than an hour later, my phone rang. My mother. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I picked up, just to hear what angle she was going to try this time. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed. I smirked. "There it is. A brand new car," she spat. "And you're telling us you can't afford to help your own parents?" There it was. The real reason she called. Not to check on me, not because she missed me, but because she saw I was doing fine without them, and that pissed her off. I leaned back in my chair. "Mom, you don't need my help. You just don't like that I finally stopped letting you take advantage of me." Her voice sharpened. "We gave you everything growing up. The least you can do is support us now that we're getting older." "You're 56, I said flatly. "You don't need support, you need boundaries." That really set her off. "So you have money for luxury, but not for your own parents?" I couldn't help it, I laughed. "That's rich. I'm selfish? You let my kids sit there on Christmas morning with nothing while their cousins opened piles of gifts because I didn't send you enough money. You weaponized Christmas to punish children. And now you're mad that I finally chose my family over you?" She was quiet for a moment, then her voice softened her last-ditch effort. "The poor, abandoned mother routine. You've changed," she said, all sadness and disappointment. "I don't even recognize you anymore." I smiled. "You mean I stopped being someone you could control?" "Yeah, I guess I did change." More silence. Then, finally, she pulled out her favorite trick. Playing the victim. "Well, if this is how you really feel about family, I guess we have nothing left to say to each other." I smirked. "Guess not." And then I hung up. I thought that was the end of it. I was sure of it. Until 3 days later, when Ava called again, she didn't even wait for me to say hello. They're selling the house, Ethan. I raised an eyebrow. Okay? She let out an exasperated sigh. Don't you care? It's the house we grew up in. I shrugged. It's their house. They can do whatever they want. A beat of silence. Then she finally got to the point. They want me to buy it. I snorted. Wow. Didn't take them long to turn on you, huh? They're old, Ethan, she said. Like I was some heartless monster. They need help, I sighed. No, they need money. And now that they can't squeeze it out of me, they're looking for their next victim. She was quiet for a second. They're asking for a lot, she admitted. Of course, they were. They weren't really struggling. If they were, they'd sell the house and downsize like normal people. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was control. They wanted someone to keep paying for their lifestyle while they held the house over their head like a leash. I almost felt bad for Ava. Almost. But then she said, So, what are you going to do about it? I blinked. Me? Nothing. She let out a frustrated laugh. Are you serious? You're really going to let them lose the house? I crossed my arms. Ava, you're the golden child. You're the one they put in the will. You're the one they give everything to. This is your problem now. She didn't like that, not one bit. You're so damn selfish, Ethan. I smiled. Maybe. Or maybe I just learned my lesson. She scoffed. Fine, but don't come crying to me when you need family. I chuckled. Pretty sure I'll survive. And with that, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt free. No guilt, no obligations, no waiting for the next phone call, wondering what they'd try next. They had finally realized they had nothing left to hold over me, and I had never been happier. I half expected Ava to call back, screaming about how I was ruining everything, but for once she stayed quiet. Maybe she was too busy trying to figure out how to come up with the money. Maybe she finally realized what I had a long time ago: our parents never needed help. They just needed someone to keep financing their lifestyle. And now that I was out, she was the only one left. It was strangely peaceful knowing I had nothing left to give them. No more money. No more guilt. No more feeling like I had to earn love that should have been given freely. For the first time in my life, I felt light, but I knew them too well to think it was over. My parents weren't the kind of people to let go quietly. There was always one last move, one final attempt to reel me back in. And sure enough, it came. A week later, I got an email from an unknown sender. Subject, "You're making a mistake." I clicked it, already knowing who it was from. Ethan, we didn't want it to come to this, but your behavior has left us with no choice. We've spoken to a lawyer. If you're going to abandon your family, then you leave us no option but to disown you officially. You will be formally removed from all family records. Your children will never know their grandparents. One day, when you realize your mistake, it will be too late. We hope it was worth it. Mom and Dad, I stared at the screen, then let out a short laugh. Well, they really went for it, huh? Emily looked over my shoulder and rolled her eyes. Oh no, she said dryly. Not formal disownment. However will we survive? I smirked. Guess they thought I'd be devastated. Are you? I thought about it, really thought about it, and the answer was no, because I had lost my parents. But not now. Not because of this. I lost them years ago when they decided that money mattered more than love. When they started treating me like an ATM instead of a son. When they made it clear that their affection came with a price tag. They weren't really disowning me. They were just putting into words what had already been true for a long time. I leaned back and stretched. Well, that saves me from sending out awkward holiday cards, I guess. Emily laughed and kissed my cheek. You're handling this way better than I thought you would. I shrugged. I already mourned this relationship a long time ago. Now it's just official. She nodded, squeezing my hand. Then let's celebrate your freedom. And we did. We took the kids out for ice cream, played board games late into the night, and for the first time in years, I didn't check my phone expecting another crisis. Because for once, there wasn't one. The next morning, I woke up to one last message. A text from Ava. Ava, hope you're happy. They sold the house. Mom cried all night. I stared at it for a second, then put my phone down. I didn't reply. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't owe them anything. And that feeling? It was better than anything money could buy. AVA's text sat unread on my phone. I wasn't ignoring it out of anger, I just didn't care anymore. For years, my parents had controlled me with guilt. Every decision, every financial sacrifice, every forced smile at Christmas dinners I didn't want to attend, it was all because of that nagging voice in my head whispering, "What if you're the bad guy?" But now, that voice was gone. They sold the house. So what? That was their choice, not mine. Not my burden. If Ava wanted to spend her time playing their savior, that was on her. I had my own family to focus on, and for the first time, I could do that without the weight of theirs dragging me down. A week passed, then two. I kept expecting another message, some dramatic last-ditch effort to drag me back in. But it never came. I guess they really had given up. Emily noticed it too. "They haven't tried calling again?" she asked one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the kids chase fireflies. "Nope," I said, stretching my legs out. "Think they finally got the message." She smirked. "And how does it feel?" I thought about that for a second. "It's weird," I admitted. "Like I keep waiting for something to go wrong, but at the same time, it's the most peace I've ever had." She squeezed my hand. "Then maybe it's time to stop waiting for the next disaster. Maybe it's time to just live." She was right. For so long, I had let them dictate my life, even when I wasn't aware of it. Their moods, their demands, their endless hunger for control, it had shaped everything I did. But not anymore. I had spent years surviving. Now it was time to live. A month later, I got one last reminder of my parents. A letter in the mail. It wasn't from them, it was from their lawyer. "Final notice. You have been formally removed from all legal and family records." I laughed when I read it. They really went through with it. Emily peeked over my shoulder. "Well, that's dramatic." I shrugged. "I mean, technically, it just makes things easier. No messy legal drama when they actually do get old and need real help." She smiled. "Guess it's official. You're free." I nodded, feeling lighter than I ever had before. "Yeah, I am." I tossed the letter in the trash. And that was the last time I ever thought about them. Years passed. My kids grew up happy, really happy. Not the fake, forced happiness I had always tried to show around my parents, but the kind that was real, built on love, laughter, and security. We built traditions of our own. Christmas mornings filled with excitement, not tension. Family game nights where nobody was keeping score of who owed who. And through it all, I never regretted my decision. Not once. Because in the end, I didn't lose a family. I gained one. One that actually cared. One that loved me for who I was, not for what I could give them. And that was worth everything. Story 2. Dad declared at Christmas dinner that you were a burden and could no longer live with us. My father set down his fork just as Christmas dinner was about to end the next day. When I had packed my belongings and informed them that I was no longer going to pay the expenses. "You are a burden and you can no longer live with us," you stated, looking me square in the eye. I initially believed I had misheard him. My mother laughed in a strange, apprehensive way, as if she wasn't sure he meant it. He waited for a response, though, and then he simply sat there looking at me. There was silence in the room. The fork was halfway to my younger sister Lily's mouth when she froze. She gave me a wide-eyed expression as though she was still in shock over what she had just heard. I put my foot down and swallowed the chunk of gammon I was chewing. "What?" "I heard you." "You stayed too long," he remarked. "You must leave." I sat there attempting to think. I was 23. I could have moved out long ago because I had a reliable employment. But they needed me, so I remained. My mom only worked part-time, and my dad had been unemployed for years, so they couldn't afford groceries, the internet, or the energy bill, which I paid most weeks. I wasn't an inconvenience. The lights in that house were still on because of me, and suddenly I was being ejected like a worthless freeloader. At last, Mom said something. "Perhaps we should discuss this at a later time." Dad interrupted. "No. I live here. I declare he's done here and I set the rules." Lily set her fork down. Even though she was just 16, I could see she was afraid. She looked at our parents as if she had never seen them before. If they could so easily cast me out. For her, what did that mean? I inhaled deeply. Okay, I wasn't going to fight or plead with them to let me leave. However, they were unprepared for the true implications of it. I reclined in my seat. "Okay," I replied. My father straightened his posture as if he had triumphed in a fictitious conflict. My mother didn't say anything, but she still seemed uneasy. Perhaps she was stunned, or perhaps she simply wasn't as concerned as I had assumed. I picked up my plate, brought it to the wash basin, and got up. I didn't want to react the way they desired. I chose to focus on Lily, who was still seated there looking anxious and perplexed. I nodded slightly to her. At this table, she was the only person I still cared about. As if nothing had occurred, Dad took a sip of his beverage. Mom returned to her mashed potato selection. Lily continued to stare at me as though she had something to say, but she remained silent. I left before supper was finished. I simply left. That night, I remained silent. I immediately walked to my room, shut the door, and began packing. I didn't want to waste time figuring out why they were acting in this way. I was gone if that's what they wanted. I wasn't going to warn them, though, because it also meant they would lose all I had paid for. Downstairs, I could hear them conversing, but I packed quietly. My mother spoke in a low, frightened voice, like he was attempting to persuade her of anything. My dad's was firm. I managed to catch fragments. He's old enough. We can manage it. He ought to have left years ago. Lily knocked on my door 1 hour later. She slid inside when I opened it and shut it behind her. She seemed distressed. Her eyes were red as though she had shed tears. "What on earth was that?" she muttered. "I'm not sure." As I stuffed my laptop into my bag, I murmured, "However, I'm heading off tomorrow." She gave a headshake. "That's absurd. Everything is your responsibility. Without you, they can't even buy food." No longer my concern. Clearly attempting to contain her emotions, she bit her lip. "Where are you heading? I'll work it out." Actually, I had some money saved up, but I hadn't intended to move out so quickly, so I would need to find a house quickly. Perhaps spend some time with a friend. But I didn't worry, I was going to be all right. They wouldn't. Lily paused. "Can I run?" She halted herself. I anticipated her question. She was still in high school, but she wanted to accompany me. And I detested having to leave her. I was unable to bring her along. They never let it to occur, you know, I said. Her gaze shifted to the floor. Yes. She simply stood there as if she didn't want to leave as I finished packing. She sighed at last. "This is something you will regret." I smiled. "I am aware." I departed before they even woke up the following morning. After loading my car and carrying my luggage downstairs, I gave the home one final glance. No regret, no melancholy, only relief. I then deleted my name from every bill in my banking app as I was leaving the driveway. Electrical, online, water. I even paid for all of them with my Netflix account. Everything would be turned off within the month if I weren't there. I grinned. I got into my car and drove off without turning around. For the days ahead, while I was searching for a place of my own, I stayed at my buddy Jake's flat. His sofa was awful. His flatmate kept asking whether I was staying permanently, and his dog, Max, kept looking at me while I attempted to sleep. But because I was free, none of it mattered. I'm done paying for a house that I'm not even interested in living in. No more acting like you respect a man who threw me out of Christmas dinner with ease. Getting treated like a walking ATM is over. At last, I was taking care of myself. My phone then began to ring 3 days after I had departed. I initially disregarded it. My mom missed 7 calls, and my dad missed 2, which surprised me because he seldom phoned, as well as a few texts from Lily. Until she emailed this, I didn't pay attention to those 2. They're going crazy. The electricity has been turned off. I smiled. They genuinely believed that the bills would pay themselves. Then there was another text. Dad is going crazy. You did something to the home, he replied. Oh, things were improving. As my mother sobbed over the Wi-Fi outage, I could see him stomping about in the dark and shouting at her. Another call an hour later. This time, as soon as I picked up the phone, I answered. I was struck like a cyclone by my mother's voice. We don't know what occurred, Kevin. There is no power. The internet is no longer available. Bill, make a dash. You failed to pay. Silence, I said simply. Then in a hushed tone, did you purchase these? It nearly made me chuckle. Are you serious? Who else, in your opinion, was footing the bill? She cut herself off, according to your father. My father was too proud to acknowledge that, as I already knew. He didn't know how it operated. He most likely assured her that everything was well, that even without me, the home would function like magic. No longer my concern. Please, Kevin, the first pleaded. It wasn't our intention. I ended the call. That seemed to be the end of it. They would work things out. Perhaps my dad would at last find a job and get off his ass. My mom could take on extra hours. To keep the lights on, they could sell anything. It's not my problem either way. My bank then sent me a note when I woke up the next morning. Beware of fraud. A suspicious attempt to log in was discovered. My heart thumping. I sat up fast. I looked at my email. 3 more warnings. I already knew the person who had attempted to enter my account. I instantly signed in and looked over my transactions. A password reset attempt was made, but nothing has been stolen as of yet. Another unsuccessful attempt to log in. Then a third. I tightened my jaw. My father must have been in a horrible situation. I gave Lily a call. She responded immediately. I was going to give you a call, she muttered. Dad is going crazy. He is constantly shouting about money. He spent the entire morning on the computer. Make a dash. With a quick sigh, I attempted to access my bank account. She remained quiet for a moment. After that, she muttered a curse. Are my former passwords in his possession? I inquired. Most likely. She acknowledged. My mom used to save them in the small notepad next to the computer. Do you remember? I was aware. My father must have been expecting that I would be foolish enough to continue using my high school passwords. Lily muttered. Kevin, I think he's extremely mad. She paused. In the distance, I could hear my dad banging doors and cursing. Then my mother started weeping. I believe he will do something foolish. Lily spoke those words. My spine tingled at what Lily said. I believe he will do something foolish. I tightened my hold on my phone. What are you saying? What was it he said? She spoke more softly. You ruined us, he says. That you intentionally screwed him by doing this. He's contemplating phoning the police. It nearly made me chuckle. For what purpose? Failing to pay his bills? I'm not sure. She gave a hiss. He's going crazy. Mom is in tears. He refuses to listen when she says she will speak with you. What he's saying is that he won't get away with this. I believe he wants to pursue you, Kevin. That makes me stop smiling. I thought my dad would become pleading and even attempt to make me feel bad. However, he believed he could exact revenge on me. That degree of stupidity was entirely new. Secure your door. I instructed her to phone me if he did something outrageous. I quickly reset all of my passwords after hanging up. My Amazon login, bank accounts, email, and streaming services. I then informed my bank over the phone that I had been the target of a cyber attack. My account was so severely restricted that it was difficult for me to access it for several hours. That seemed to be the end of it. I was completely mistaken. Jake and I were hanging around at his flat that evening as he played a dumb Xbox game. Jake halted the game when there was a loud knock on the door. Are you expecting a visitor? No, I wasn't. And I already felt uneasy. My stomach dropped as I stood up and made my way to the individuals. It was my father. He stood in the corridor, about to charge, fists tensed, breathing like a bull. Who is it? Jacob. I moved away from the entrance. My father. Jake got to his feet. What's going on, dude? One more explosion. The door was opened by Kevin. I remained still. Once more, he pounded. This time, it's harder. You're in there, I know that. Do you really believe you can ignore this? Jake gave me a scowl. Should we run, dude? Before he was done, the door was kicked in by my dad. That was it. Reaching for my phone, I dialed 911. My dad arrived at my flat just now. When I told the dispatcher that he was shouting at me and pounding on the door, he just attempted to kick it in. Jake stepped back. This is ridiculous, Kevin. I looked him in the eyes. Yes, I am aware of it. As my dad continued to shout, I clutched the phone to my ear. You're a little ungrateful. You believe you can simply leave? You owe us. You run. Officers are en route, sir. The dispatcher stated. After 2 minutes, I heard sirens. Then a tap on the door was interrupted by my dad's voice. Officers! Get out! My dad was being handcuffed by 2 cops as I opened the door. His chest heaved and his cheeks reddened. His gaze, however, altered when he noticed me standing there observing. There was only anger, no remorse or humiliation. Did you do this? As they took him away, he snarled. He actually did it to himself. so I simply stood there and watched, unaffected. I knew it wasn't finished even when they took my dad away that evening. An hour later, Lily gave me a call. Mom is going crazy. She claimed to be crying and to be blaming you for everything. Yes, that seems about correct. You need to fix this, she says repeatedly. She is already attempting to obtain bail money by calling people. It nearly made me chuckle. How much money? Quiet. Since neither of us knew they had any. No savings, no internet, no electricity. And without me, there isn't a father figure to yell at everyone while acting in charge. They were rapidly sinking. All I felt was relief, even though I should have felt bad. Watch her. I told Lily to call me if she did anything out of the ordinary. Lily texted me the next morning, as expected. Mom is selling your belongings. I went cold. I then gave her a call. She immediately picked up. Sharp voice. I instructed you to correct this. Are you going to sell my belongings? After a moment, frank. Kevin, we need money. I tightened my jaw. You're robbing me then? You no longer reside here. She lost her temper. All of this is behind you. Our home is where it is. It is thus ours. She was entitled and lacked regret or shame. I'm going to call the police. Don't you dare, I said. I ended the call. I then made a police call. I received another call 2 hours later. We spoke with your mom. That's what the officer said. Despite her displeasure, she consented to retain your belongings until you could get them. I should have realized they weren't ready when I texted Lily that I was heading over, since something made my stomach turn when I drew up to the home. I have my automobile parked in the driveway. I had left it at Jake's flat, so it shouldn't have been there. With my heart racing, I switched off the engine. Not only was my automobile present, it was being driven. It appeared as though someone had been sitting in the front seat since it was folded back. The worst thing was that the gas tank was nearly empty, and my glove compartment was open. I balled my fists up. Before I could escape, they had taken my vehicle. Its front door opened. My mom crossed her arms and went outside. You reported me to the police? I said. She said. My automobile was stolen by you. I fired back. She laughed. It only sat there. It wasn't being used by you. I gazed at her, attempting to comprehend the absurdity of this reasoning. It's my vehicle. Even so, how did you obtain it? I knew they had an extra key even before she responded. Mom. My voice was dangerously calm as I said, I'll contact the police once again if you don't give me my key. For a brief moment, her expression wavered. Then she rushed in without saying a word. She returned a minute later and hurled the key in my direction. It fell on the grass there after striking my chest. She spat. Joyful? I picked it up, controlling my rage. I'm packing up my belongings and heading out permanently. I went right by her and inside the home. Lily was nervous as she waited in the hallway. She murmured, She took your laptop and panned it. The first shut my eyes. Inhale, then exhale. I looked at my mom. Is my laptop somewhere? She raised her chin. We needed money, I told you. That was it. I took out my phone, made the second 911 call of the week, and then I let her observe. Indeed. I would want to report both stolen stuff and a stolen car. I looked her in the eye as I spoke. My mother just acknowledged that she had pawned my laptop without my consent. Her face was devoid of color. It was her who had to deal with the police this time. My mother went into a frenzy when she realized I wasn't kidding. This is not possible. Her voice is low. Your mommy is me. I paid her no attention. Indeed, officer. She acknowledged removing my possessions and pawning them, and I have documentation of this. I spoke into the phone. I'd want to file charges. Lily's gaze darted between us as she stood still. Now my mom's hands were trembling. I never pushed back, and she appeared utterly surprised, as if she believed she could keep pressing. Kevin. She made another attempt, this time more subtly, as if pleading. We're having trouble. Your dad is incarcerated. There was nothing I could do. You had an option. You could have put in more effort, I remarked. You had the option to sell your own belongings. As an alternative to discarding me like trash, you may have sought for assistance. Her face was twisted as she blinked rapidly. I was upset, I chuckled. Yes, I was as well. Outside, I heard sirens. My mother leaped. 2 policemen entered the room a few minutes later. Did you call regarding stolen stuff, sir? One of them inquired. I gestured to my mother while nodding. She stole my Pandit and laptop. I'd want to file charges. As though I had stabbed her, my mother gasped, "Don't do this, Kevin." The cops looked at her. "This it true, ma'am." She paused, looking from Lily to me and back to the police. I could see her doing calculations to determine whether she could get away with lying. Then Lily said something. "Shortly before he phoned you," she told him herself. It was almost frightening how quickly my mother snapped her head at Lily. "MAAM, you tiny dash?" She was interrupted by a police officer. "Have you a pawn shop receipt?" Her expression dropped. She was aware of what was going to happen. They let her out. Through the glass, I saw them converse with her for a little while before handcuffing her. She was having trouble, began to weep, screaming. They looked through their blinds at their neighbors. Her cries that this was unjust and that she was simply a struggling mother were likely heard by everyone on the street. Beside me, Lily gazed out the window. She took a deep breath. "Is this a genuine thing?" I gave a nod. Indeed, and I felt calm for the first time in a long time. My phone then buzzed. A call from an unknown number. "This is something you will regret." My chest constricted. I went back and read it. Then I discovered my father had been freed on bond. I understood precisely what had happened as soon as I saw that message. My dad had been bailed out by someone, and I knew who it was. Perhaps an old drinking friend, or perhaps a distant relative who hadn't heard the whole story. In any case, he was angry and out. I displayed the text to Lily. Her face became white. "You have to go, Kevin." "No, they do," I said. I looked at the police officers who were still outside addressing my mother. "Can I enter and retrieve my remaining belongings?" One of them gave a nod. "As long as your sister is on board." Lily was on the go already. "Let's get things done quickly." We gathered everything I owned and went upstairs. Old video games, clothing, and even the foolish items I had left behind in the hopes of returning for them someday. I would not return. Never. My mother was still sobbing in the driveway as I carried the final box to my car, pleading with the cops to release her. "There is a miscommunication here. He is my son. He wouldn't harm me in this way." I ignored her and simply walked by her. She yelled my name as though it would make a miraculous difference. I climbed into my vehicle. Lily was standing at my window, moving from one foot to the other. "I have no desire to be here." I let out a sigh. "You just have 2 years left till you are 18, and I know you don't." With hazy eyes, she nodded. "I'll be all right. I'll simply keep my head down and stay silent. If something goes wrong, give me a call." She gave another nod. Then, down the street, headlights came on. On our street, a vehicle turned. I felt sick to my stomach. My father. He arrived. I had just turned on the engine. I put it in reverse and backed into the street before he could even get out. His angry eyes were fixed on me, as if he were about to approach and do something. I barely slid down my window so that my speech could be heard. He made another attempt to approach me. "A restraining order is what I'm requesting." He balled his hands into fists. "Do you believe that you are superior to us?" I grinned. "I am aware of this." I then took off in my car. I didn't see them again after that. I relocated, updated my financial details, and banned my parents' numbers. And I didn't turn around. It took Lily 2 years to persevere, exactly what she promised. She left the moment she turned 18. She left for college and moved in with a buddy. We continue to speak frequently. What about my parents? My father never worked. A year later, my mom lost the house. They spent some time bouncing about, destroying relationships with relatives, and they were renting a dilapidated flat in a terrible area of town when I last heard from them. They made an effort to contact me, unknown phones, Facebook messages, and even mail. Because they chose that Christmas meal, I never replied, and I created mine. Story 3. For a year, I provided my parents $600 a week, but they didn't ask me to go on a family trip. My dad responded, "We didn't want you there." My phone burst with missed calls a day later. I ought to have anticipated it. There were always signs. How? While I was there, they spoke of my sister as though she were a gift from God to humanity. Even when she accomplished nothing but this, they always managed to give her praise. This was rudeness on a whole other level. For a year, I gave my parents $600 per week. I didn't find it easy. I didn't have a lot of money to spend. To ensure kids wouldn't have to struggle, I strained my budget to the limit and worked hard for every dollar. They pretended it was the end of the world when my dad was laid off. My mother contacted me crying and said they were unsure of how they would survive. They had their mortgage, food, and bills. I could not allow them to fail, so I took over. It felt fantastic to help at first, as if I were accomplishing anything valuable. However, they appeared to expect more the more I offered. It was quickly if I sent $600. It's tight this week, Mike. Would it be possible for you to send a bit more? They never explicitly stated. However, the guilt trip persisted. When I looked at my account, I realized it wasn't wise. Still, I'd do it, since they were my parents. Since I believed that was what families did. Laura, my sister, was contentedly living in her own little world in the meanwhile. According to my parents, she was a success because she married a wealthy man. They never admitted that she had never worked a day in her life and that her ease was all due to her husband's wealth. They discussed her as if she were a financial whiz. Mike, she made wise choices. You ought to take a cue from her wise decisions. Finding a man ready to finance her was the only decision she had to make. Let's imagine, nevertheless, that she created her life on her own. I remained silent. What was the purpose? She was their golden kid, regardless of what I did. I decided to swallow my pride as long as she was doing well. Then, 3 days prior to my inviting her to a picnic last week, this occurred. Nothing extraordinary. A pleasant evening out with a few beers and some steaks. My reward. They rejected me right away. They weren't feeling well, according to my mom. She sighed when I inquired if they needed anything. All we want to do is sleep. Honey, we don't want you to become sick. I paused. Can I get you some food? Are you sure? Stopped? Don't stop by, please. However, it would be helpful if you could provide us with some medication. This week has been a touch tight. I didn't give it any second thought. I immediately sent them $200. Thank you, sweetheart. As soon as we can, we will reimburse you. 3 days have passed since then. I received a call from Mr. Jenkins, my neighbor, the next day. He is an elderly man who has always shown kindness. We occasionally speak, mostly small conversation. However, he said something this time that made me nauseous. I wanted to inform you that while your parents were away, I visited their home and fed their fish. I scowled. Where has it disappeared to? Oh, their journey. They should return shortly. 6 days ago, they departed. 6 days. For a moment, I was unable to speak. My thoughts were racing. With whom are they? You know, your sister and her spouse. It appeared to be a pleasant family trip. I can't recall how I hung up the phone. I simply sat there trying to take it all in while gazing at the wall. The same folks who contacted me every other week to ask for additional money and told me they were having financial difficulties, my parents, had taken a trip with Laura without telling me. Furthermore, they had lied to me in front of me 3 days prior, when they were already on vacation. I had been informed that they were ill. They had requested money from me and refused to let me see them. I felt like the world's biggest fool as I sat there. I woke up that night and stared at the ceiling while recalling all the times they had requested for my assistance. I always worried about my personal finances because I wanted to make sure they were in good shape. Each time they sat there elevating Laura, they made me feel as though I had to stand by them. When they returned home the next day, I made the decision to speak with them. I was unprepared for what came next, but I also didn't know what to anticipate. I took some time to visit their home. It took me some time to calm down. I could have said something I couldn't take back if I had arrived as soon as I learned. However, I knew I couldn't let it go after a restless night. So the next evening, I drove over. The dust from the journey back was still on her car as it sat in the driveway. The light on the porch was on. After a few seconds, my mother answered the door when I knocked. Her expression brightened as though nothing had occurred. Mike. Oh, what a pleasant surprise. We had just finished our meal. I entered. The home was immaculate, as though they had thoroughly cleaned everything before departing. The table was covered with beautiful flowers. By the steps was a partially empty suitcase. It seemed like entering a scenario from an idyllic little family holiday. I inhaled deeply. How was the journey then? I could see the glimmer of shame in her eyes as soon as I finished speaking. She tried to grin. Which journey? I gave a little chuckle. Laura and her husband were in the one you took, the one you misrepresented. Her face transformed in an instant. As though expecting my father would step in, she cast a peek toward the kitchen. However, he didn't. While he pretended not to hear, I could hear him shifting plates about. I waited. I wanted to offer her an opportunity to clarify, to acknowledge it, to speak in a way that makes sense. She crossed her arms instead. Why you're furious is beyond me. It is not necessary for us to tell you everything. Yes, we do. I gazed at her. Are you serious? Every week, I have been giving you money. I didn't even realize I was paying for that vacation. You also informed me you were unwell 3 days ago. You were most likely sitting on a beach when you asked me for money for medication. At last, my father made the decision to become involved. He crossed his arms as he entered the hall. Be mindful of your tone. My breath came out sharply. What do you know? No, I won't pay attention to my tone. I go out of my way to assist you. You also tell me lies. My mother sighed as if I were the one who was going overboard. Mike, all we wanted was a pleasant trip. Why must you make money the center of everything? That was it. My breaking point was that. I hope that was enjoyable. Because I'm done, I said. In front of them, I took out my phone, launched my banking app, and stopped the automatic transactions. My mother's face became white. For the first time, my father's jaw tightened. In fact, they appeared concerned. Don't be like this, Mike. My mother started. We're having a hard time, you know. I chuckled. Yes. They weren't difficult enough to prevent you from taking a trip. I was about to head out the door when my dad said something that made me stop. You're only envious that you weren't invited. I pivoted. I'm sorry. He gave a shrug. Finished the unfazed. This is truly about that, isn't it? We didn't invite you, so you're having a fit. My hands began to shake, not with sorrow, not with unfiltered, roiling rage. That is how Laura and I differ from one another. She wouldn't have given you a dime, I replied. You continue to treat her as though she's a walking duck. I made sure you were all right for a year. To be honest, you don't even show me enough respect. I didn't wait for her to answer. After leaving, I got into my car and drove off. My phone was blowing up by the time I arrived home. My mother is calling. My father. Laura, too. I paid no attention to any of them, and Anna was waiting for me on the couch as I entered. She knew with just one glance at me. I took a seat beside her, let out a strong breath, and stated it out. I stopped handing them cash. At first, Anna remained silent. As though she had been waiting for me to sit down at last, she just nodded. I guess I had been waiting too, to be honest. I had been feeling confined for months by an unstated duty, as though I had to look after her because, if I didn't, then who would? However, it was the problem. I had the answer beforehand. Laura was capable of doing it. I was the one who took money out of my paycheck each week to make sure our parents were comfortable, even though she and her husband had enough money for 100 trips. For what purpose? To receive preferential treatment, despite being viewed as a contingency plan? No more. Anna folded her arms and reclined on the couch. Now what? Do you believe they will simply accept the defeat? I wiped my face with my hand. I'll be the target of their blame. Perhaps send Laura to reason with me. I don't care, though. I'm finished. I meant it too. At least I believed I did. My phone was ringing nonstop the next morning. Voicemails, SMS messages, and missed calls. It was unrelenting. I paid them all no attention. Then, at about midday, there was a loud tap on the apartment. Anna gave me a glance. Don't tell me you invited her. I got up and shook my head, but I heard her voice before I got to the door. Laura's. I know you're home, Mike. Go ahead and open the door. When I opened it, I saw Laura standing there looking like she had just left brunch, wearing a high-end dress and sunglasses. And her parents were just behind her. I took a small step forward to prevent them from entering. What are you looking for? Laura laughed. On vacation, are you really searching Mom and Dad? I laughed a little dryly. No, I'm cutting them off because they have been deceiving me for months, treating you like a king or queen and using me like a damn ATM. However, you were already aware of it, weren't you? She gave an eye roll. Oh, please. You pretend that they made you send money. I tightened my jaw. Laura, they certainly exploited me, but they didn't force me. We don't know how we're going to make it calls, the guilt trips, and the phony sob tales. They were saving it for trips with you all the time. At last, my mother raised her voice. Mike, that's unfair. We had trouble. She suddenly stopped talking as I raised an eyebrow and said that you were struggling so hard that you required additional money for medicine while enjoying cocktails on the beach. Laura let out a loud sigh. Look, it doesn't matter. Let's all move on from this and simply resume the payments. I nearly burst out laughing at her. Do you really believe that I will simply comply and continue to pay? No, they are paid for by you. After being silent the entire time, my dad abruptly came forward. Your money is not what we desire. I folded my arms. Excellent. Since you're not understanding it, Laura chuckled bitterly. Whoa. Are you just going to leave them now? Anna, who had been sitting on the couch listening, rose and left them. Do you imply that they abandoned him? Told him a lie? Exploited him? Laura looked at Anna as though she had just caught sight of her. Oh, wonderful! What do you think? Anna grasped Laura's hair at that point. Neither of us had time to respond since it happened so quickly. A single second. The next Anna had a handful of her flawless salon-style hair as Laura stood there looking smug. With a hauntingly serene tone, Anna remarked, Listen to me very carefully. You will never return here with your parents. Both Mike and I are done with you. Now turn back, climb into your expensive vehicle, and leave. With a yell, Laura struck Anna's hand until she released it. Stumbling back, she looked utterly furious. You're insane! She let out a cry. Anna smiled. First, give me a try. In fact, Laura appeared anxious. Expecting our parents to be by her side, she looked back to them, but they remained silent. I believe they came to terms with their defeat at last. Laura fixed her clothes, sighed, and sent me a final glance. This is something you'll regret. I simply grinned. No way. She then bounded off, our parents following her like lost pups. I turned to Anna as soon as they were gone. She gave a shrug. What? She was worthy. For the first time in days, I laughed. Remember that I will never irritate you. I never sent my parents a cent again after that. Laura could look after them if she were that flawless. My phone rang the next morning. Before I even glanced at it, I knew who it was. I thought about ignoring it, but my curiosity won out. As soon as I said hello, I grabbed it up. Mom got things started. Mike, what transpired yesterday is unbelievable. Your sister was touched by your ex-girlfriend. What does she believe herself to be? I reclined in my seat. Do you mean the moment Laura arrived at my door? Anna urged her to go after she insulted me. My dad interrupted. Laura's hair was tugged by her. That is assault. You must keep your wife under control. I sneered. You must keep your daughter under control. Laura was bringing energy to my door, and Anna was just giving it back. Raise yourself better than this stockpile, Mike. I gave an eye roll. Yes. Additionally, you brought me up to be your own financial account. If I'm done learning life lessons from you, please pardon me. It's disrespectful of you, my mom complained. Your folks are where? I've already sighed about it. And yesterday, I didn't welcome you to my place as an adult. You arrived without warning, were reprimanded, and now you're upset about it. Mike, you have to take that woman seriously. My father lost his temper. That was it. I gave a harsh chuckle. I know I should end the call. You dare not dash, Michael. Click. I rubbed my temples and tossed the phone on the table. Bringing a cup of coffee, Anna entered from the kitchen. That's why I smiled as I looked up at her. It seems like I'm meant to dominate you. She gave a snort. Even your own daughter is beyond your control. I wish you luck in your endeavor. That seemed to be the end of it. However, 3 hours later, there was a loud, hostile tap on the door once more. Even before I opened it, I knew who it was. Laura appeared enraged as she stood there with her arms crossed. She wasn't alone, though. Dan, her husband, was standing directly behind her and didn't appear furious. He appeared to be dangerous. I was hardly able to say anything. What on earth do you desire? Before he strode right inside my flat, he brushed by me. Do you find this amusing? With a snarl, he poked a finger at Anna, allowing your young girlfriend to touch my wife. Anna got to her feet, unimpressed. Your wife walked toward her after running her mouth around our house. Before I understood what I was doing, perhaps she needed to learn a little respect. My fist went flying. He staggered back in disbelief as I struck him squarely in the jaw. I wasn't finished, though. I released all of the resentment and aggravation that had accumulated over the previous 12 months. Punch after punch. When I took a step back, I continued. Dan was groaning on the ground, his face a jumble of swelling and bruising. Laura let out a cry and collapsed beside him. "Are you insane?" I scowled at her while shaking my hand. "You're here to get into a fight. You've located one." Dan looked up at me after coughing and wiping blood from his lip. "Man, you didn't have to put forth so much effort." I bent over. "In my own home, you made threats against my girlfriend. If you ever return to this place, it will be worse." Laura scowled at me as she helped him up. "Mike, you just sparked a conflict." I smiled. "No, you did." Dan mumbles, still stunned. "I apologize, dude. I shouldn't have hurried." I interrupted him. "Leave now!" Without saying another thing, they departed. Anna approached and glanced at my knuckles before turning to face the door. "Well," she said as she sipped her coffee, "the situation has become worse." I chuckled and shook my head. "I'm not joking. I felt free for the first time in my life. No more duties, no more guilt, no more acting like the underdog who needed to use money to prove himself. I was finished. I never heard from Laura or Dan again after they left. No texts, no calls, nothing but quiet. And that was okay with me." Anna and I continued as though nothing had occurred. 3 days later, when I was making my way to my car, my neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, stopped me. "You really messed things up, boy." Shaking his head, he said. I scowled. "What are you saying?" He smiled. "Let's say it a little argument between your sister and your parents. And by little, I mean that it could be heard throughout the entire street." I took notice of that. "When?" "It began last night as I was outside watering my plants. Before she reached the porch, your sister screamed and slammed the vehicle door so hard I feared the glass would break." I arched an eyebrow. "What was the subject of their argument?" "Well," Mr. Jenkins remarked, leaning in as though you were going to share the most juicy rumor of the year with me. They were shouting so loudly that I could hear every word, but I didn't want to pry. Naturally, I approached and stood beneath their window. I chuckled. "Your sister was upset with them, of course. Something about how you should have been treated better and how you wouldn't have lost your temper if they hadn't been so avaricious. She insisted that they were to blame, that you had cut them off, and that she now had to deal with them." I blinked. "Hold on. Taking care of them?" Mr. Jenkins gave a smile. "Yes. The finest thing is that. Since you refused to give them any money, your parents told her that she needed to start assisting them." I would start laughing. "Oh," he responded, "it gets better." She lost it and began yelling that she wasn't their bank and that they ought to have saved money rather than squandering it on lavish holidays. Referred to her as a leech. And my best part, too. In fact, she suggested that you call Mike and apologize so that he would reinstate the payments. I dabbed at the tears in my eyes. "What did she say?" "We no longer desire your dad's money," he remarked. "What about your mother?" "Your mother?" She broke down in tears because you failed her. "And that family is meant to support one another. However, your sister didn't believe it." I quote what she told them. "Family doesn't matter to you. Who you can extract money from is important to you." She then bounded out. I shook my head, not believing it. Thus, they lost us both in a single week. "It appears so, Mr. Jenkins remarked. "You're alone yourself now. No dependable income. No golden child. With no one else left to feel bad about assisting them, it was just the two of them sitting in that house." I exhaled deeply and let everything to settle in. They had been favorites for years. They had disregarded me, mistreated me, and taken me for granted. And in the end, everything fell apart with just one flash of insight. What's the best part? It didn't make me feel horrible. Not by any means. I grinned as I glanced at Mr. Jenkins. "You finally got what you wanted, I suppose." "How is that?" he inquired. I turned to open the door of my automobile. Their ideal kid would have been Laura. She is now theirs to keep. I had no regrets after that and drove away. Update. That seemed to be the end of it. Yes, I did. My parents were living alone. I had finally managed to get away from Laura, who was furious. Everything was quiet. A week or so later, I received a text message from an unidentified number. My children who return my calls. It's crucial. I debated whether or not to ignore it for a while, but my curiosity overcame me. I made a call. He picked up right away. Listen, Mike, we need to discuss, but I don't want to argue. I let out a sigh. This isn't about money if that's what it is. He interrupted me. It has to do with your sister. I took notice of that. How about her? He paused. She is divorcing her husband. I nearly dropped my phone. Hold on. What? Dan ejected her. My father said. He said that she was back here with us and that he was done helping her. There is nowhere else for her to go. I suppressed a chuckle. Do you mean that the woman who advised me to just restart the payments is now homeless and back at your house? My dad let out a deep sigh. Please, Mike, this isn't amusing. I reclined on the sofa. In a way, it is. A protracted hush ensued. She wishes to speak with you. At last, he spoke. I smiled. It's not my issue. I then hung up. Finally, I suppose, Laura experienced what it's like to be on the other side.